And we will bring up PowerShell with elevated privileges. Okay, so I'm going to bring up Windows PowerShell admin here. Okay, that took a second to load there, but that's okay. Okay, now what I want to do first is I want to make sure that we have a module called PowerShell Get. Okay, so I'm going to type in install-module space PowerShell Get. Now, PowerShell Get is a module that will allow us to access the PowerShell gallery, which is online, and really has so many scripts and so many modules that we can take advantage of with PowerShell. Okay, but we're going to, of course, focus on the Windows Autopilot. Okay, so at this point, we will type in git dash, or excuse me, we're going to do install dash script dash name, just like we saw on the slide. Okay, git dash Windows Autopilot info. Okay, I just want to check my spelling here real quick. All right, that looks good to me. Okay, so we'll go ahead and execute there. Now it's going to ask us if it's okay. Now for the most part, if you are not familiar with PowerShell, there are execution policies. So something that I pre-configured before the demo here is, so in real world, you might want to type in git dash execution policy, and it might tell you whether it's restricted or not. Okay, and then you can do a set dash execution policy. And at that point, you could say unrestricted or signed, if any script has a digital signature or something to that extent. So I do want to convey that just real quick. Now I'm going to say yes to all, that it is coming from an untrusted repository, but we do know what this is doing. Okay, so we're going to say yes here. Okay, now at this point, it's gathered the information for this individual computer. Now the one that I'm on right now is called CL1, okay, so client 1. Okay, so now we're going to do the git dash Windows Autopilot .ps1. Oh, excuse me, info .ps1. Okay, now at this point, you'll see that it actually did create a hardware hash. Okay, so that's kind of like a digital signature there. Okay, and then from there, let's do the same command with the output file parameter, and then tell it where to pipe this information. Okay, so I'm going to go to C:\\, and let's just call it cl1.csv. Okay, so at this point we have our file. Okay, now I'm going to close out PowerShell. Okay, and then we're going to come into the Azure portal at this point. Okay, now at this point, we're going to come in, and let me get to the home page here so we can start it from scratch here. Okay, and so this is typically whenever you log on to Azure where you will start. Okay, so I'm going to come right into Intune here. Now from there, if we look to the left, we're going to see a few options, but we're going to focus really on device enrollment here. Now when we select that, okay, and I do have some devices already enrolled. We're going to come to Windows Enrollment here. Now, this is the automatic enrollment. We want to make sure that is enabled. We can also do that through Azure. Okay, and then from there, we're going to come down to where we see Windows Autopilot Deployment Program. Now, here's the deployment profile I was mentioning just a moment ago, and we're going to take a look at that. Okay, but here's the devices. Okay, so the idea is we want to come in here. Okay, now I've already imported one in for a future demo. Okay, and at this point what we could do now is just come straight up to the top here where we see import. We select that, we browse out to the CSV file that we just created. Okay, so that's going to be on the C drive. Okay, cl1.csv. Okay, so at that point, it's going to tell us that it is formatted correctly. Now, if it's not, it will actually show you right here that it's not, and then no way will it import correctly. And the import process says it could take up to 15 minutes, but I've noticed it usually takes around 5. Okay, so I'm going to go and select import. Okay, and at this point, it's going to take a few minutes for that to kick in. Now, we will notice right up here towards the top that it shows import in progress, estimated time 0 minutes. This process can take up to 15. Okay, so we'll come back and check on it. Okay, but what I'm going to do now, in the meantime, I'm going to come back, okay, to where I was just a moment ago. Okay, so pretty much the device enrollment, and then we're going to come to Windows enrollment. Now we're going to scroll down. Now keep in mind this is where we just left off right here where we imported the CSV file. Okay, so now we're going to come to deployment profiles. Okay, now at this point we're going to create profile. Okay, and let's just call it Windows Autopilot for org company. Now remember, that's the name of the domain. Okay, now at this point we could also give it a description if need be. Okay, so we're pretending like it's for Surface devices. Okay, so we'll put Surface tablets. Okay, and we'll just say auto enrollment. Okay, now at this point, let me spell tablets correctly. Okay, now of course a description is optional, I just figured for fun. Okay, now if we take a look here, there are several options that we're going to dissect. Now it says by default this profile can be applied to Autopilot devices synced from Autopilot services. So once we get that CSV file imported, there's going to be a sync button. Okay, and we'll select that. Okay, now from there, you'll see convert all targeted devices to Autopilot. Now, the answer is no on that, because keep in mind we want the known devices, and you may already have certain users that are already enrolled, and you would not want them to basically reset their PCs at that point. Okay, but you know, you may want to, so just all depending, but right now we're going to keep that at no, and we will go next here. Now at this point, this is going to give us our OOBE, which is out-of-box experience. Okay, so if we come in here, we have our deployment mode. Now you're going to see that we have user-driven or self-deploying. Okay, now user-driven meaning, now keep in mind, the idea is once they turn on the device, they're still kind of going through the GUI portion of setup to where they will select their keyboard layout, basically their locale, their username, their password, whether they want to join a domain or not. Okay, so user-driven meaning they will be prompted for these values. Now, of course, you know, second level, third level administrators and desktop support and things like that, you most likely are going to give them that luxury. But at the same time, if we just want to make it ZTI, then we just drop this down to self-deploying preview. Okay, so it really depends on what you're looking for there now. But if we do self-deploying, you will notice that it grays everything out, you know, and the idea there is that it will be fully automated. The user will not have the choices. Okay, our file just did import successfully. I'm not sure if you just saw the notification pop up at the top right there. Okay, but we'll check back on that. So that means it probably synced itself as well. Okay, now from there, let's go to the user-driven. Okay, and at this point you'll see join to Azure AD, and they also have these little info bubbles here to kind of help us out. Okay, so if you get lost in the sauce a little bit here, you just bring your mouse over here and it might help you a little bit. And then if not, we could always go, of course, to the Google or any search provider and gather information. Okay, so we'll see Azure AD joined. Okay, but you can also do a hybrid. Now this is important for real world. If you plan on doing just cloud identities, then you're most likely going to do Azure AD joined. But if you're going to be doing a hybrid to where you have your on-prem Active Directory domain services and your off-prem Azure AD to where you're going to use a program called AD Connect that will allow them to synchronize these identities back and forth. Okay, and that is something we are ultimately going to discuss in the course here. But real world, during the planning phase, that would be very, very important. Okay, so right now we're just going to say Azure AD joined. We haven't really synchronized the environments yet. Okay, and then from there, Microsoft software license term. Now, if you've done an installation before, at some point you do see the end user license agreement, the EULA. So do you want them to see this or not is really what it boils down to. So we could say show, okay, or hide, just depending on what we feel appropriate. Okay, and then from there, if we do show, then it also wants to know if we want to see the privacy settings, okay? And that's also part of the GUI portion of setup. Okay, so we can show that or hide that, okay, just depending on what we want to do. All right, and then from there, you'll see the default value for diagnostic data collection has changed to devices running Windows 10 version 1903 or later. Okay, so at that point, you want to make sure that you do have that version, and really what you'll see there is hide, change account options, and then user account type. Now, this is really for the users themselves. Like if I come here, you'll see change account settings right there on my start menu. And that pretty much takes me to the settings app and allows me to modify certain things. Now, we are going to see the settings app along the way, but at that point, they may go in there and actually disconnect from their Azure domain. So we may not want them to have that as an option. Okay, so we can either show or hide that as well. Okay, and then basically the user account type. Now, by default, most users are going to be a standard user, okay, but we can make them a local administrator. Now, before we go any further here, I do want to convey something. Now, whenever you do a fresh install of Windows 10, it does create the built-in administrator account and it disables it by default, okay? Now, if you do not want the built-in administrator account there at all, that is another benefit of the Windows auto deployment. It literally removes the built-in administrator from these devices altogether. Now, at that point, that might be a great thing, especially for standard users, assuring that they can't ever even be a local administrator because, whenever they're logging onto the domain and they log on locally to the computer and they are a local administrator, they get used to certain privileges that they will not have in the domain. And then not only that, it may cause conflicts as well. Okay, but that is also something we have to decide in our planning phase. Okay, so I'm going to take the defaults here and we'll go next. Okay, so the idea, remember that we're building our deployment profile, and then we have to assign it either to a device or a group of users. Okay, so at this point we could come in and select a group, and I can say all devices. Okay, which right now, for simplicity, I'll go that route because we really haven't gotten into users and groups and all that yet, but we will. And you know what, just like an Active Directory, you organize your users, you place them in groups, according to their department or what resource they may need to access, and same thing with computers. And essentially, if you're used to administering Active Directory, we're really doing the same thing, but cloud-based and web-based. And instead of group policy, we're using different policies called compliance policies and conditional access. But to me, the concepts are the same. We just have to get familiar with the new terms. Okay, now, at this point, we're just going to assign it to all devices. Okay, and then at this point, we review everything, make sure that we have it all accordingly. And then we create. Okay, so at this point, the client would join the Azure domain automatically. Okay, and then at that point, be configured with any of the settings that we just put on there. Okay, so I wanted to demo that. Okay, and it's